The movie opened with a chaotic and violent scene. In the dead of night, a group of people were mercilessly beating a man named Ningchong. From the darkness, the roar of an engine sounded. A motorcycle rushed forward like a whirlwind, and Sun appeared, cold and powerful, quickly knocking each of them down. When one of them pulled out a knife, intending to stab Boss Ningchong, and Sun didn't hesitate to use his body to block the blade. After suppressing the thugs, he collapsed on the spot, his blood staining the ground red. A few months later, at a karaoke bar, and Sun stood in front of a mirror, his cold eyes glancing over the scar from that knife wound. He thought to himself that it was thanks to that injury that he was able to stay by Kuan-jai's side, that he had a position today. When he left the room, he saw his subordinates teasing a girl. Without hesitation, he stepped forward to help her out. That was the first time Sun and the girl named Ling met. Because he had risked his life to save Boss Ningchong, and Sun had a solid position in Kuan-jai's company and was trusted and valued. In contrast, Entai, Ningchong's younger brother, was always jealous of him, but didn't dare to openly confront him because Ningchong saw Sun as a blood brother. That day was also Ling Yi's first day working at the karaoke bar. According to her sister's instructions, she had to bring wine to the VIP room because today's important guest was someone from the Kuan-jai group. She dressed up carefully, confidently walking in, unaware that her fate was about to turn in a different direction. When Ling Yi brought in the wine, and Sun recognized that she was the girl from earlier, Entai saw her and had the idea to tease her, forcing her to drink a glass of wine. Before everyone's coercive gaze, she had no choice but to restrain herself and drink it all. As she was about to leave, she accidentally mistook Entai for Sun. Entai then wrapped his arms around her, mocking her for not even being able to distinguish people, saying what qualifications did she have to work here. He pushed her to sit down next to Sun, as if wanting to use her as entertainment. The little girl cowered in panic among the scrutinizing gazes. Entai, seeing Sun's indifference, intended to pull her elsewhere, but Sun unexpectedly grabbed her hand, holding her back and appearing enthusiastic. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer, signaling to his subordinates to arrange a private room. Without hesitation, he stepped into the room. Ling Yi, out of fear, had no choice but to follow. But before she could step through the door, Entai grabbed her hair, forcing her to remember that the person just now was him. Entai, not in Senator, she unconsciously remembered that she had bumped into him once before. The memory flooded back, chilling her spine. When the door to the room closed, Ling Yi was completely alone, facing Senator in the dim light. She was extremely confused, thinking that she was about to be humiliated. Sun approached, gently stroking her hair, saying that she couldn't survive in this place with her current appearance. If she wanted to survive, she had to learn how to be seductive. Those words made Ling Yi tremble. She could only beg to leave, affirming that she didn't want to learn how to please men. Outside the door, Entai was still secretly watching, as if waiting for an exciting scene. Sun at that moment pulled down her shirt strap. In a panic, she raised her hand and slapped him, then begged for her life. He was silent, not reacting, only lunging at her like a beast. Ling Yi struggled desperately, her weak pleas echoing in the closed room. Meanwhile, the one outside the door continued to watch with a smirk. Sun said that if she wanted to end it there, she had to know how to scream louder, otherwise everything was just beginning. Ling Yi nodded, accepting the agreement. The two began to create a perfect play, pretending to be passionately making love to deceive Entai, who was lurking outside. Seeing that seemingly real scene, he smiled gleefully and then retreated, leaving the empty space behind the door. When everything was quiet again, Sun quickly put his shirt back on, confirming that the situation was safe. From his pocket, he pulled out a wad of money as compensation for her. But Ling Yi only took a few bills, enough to pay for the wine, a decisive attitude that made him curious. He held her hand, asking her name. When he heard her say Ling Yi, a smile briefly appeared on his lips, his eyes slightly amused. He praised her alertness and self-respect, admitting that she deserved more, but wasn't greedy. Before leaving the room, he deliberately messed up her hair to match the script they had just played out. Then, with a cold and indifferent expression, he advised her that there were many jobs in the world. She didn't necessarily have to choose this one. Ling Yi only knew how to thank him, and then hurriedly ran away, as if escaping from a nightmare. In her haste, she forgot her phone, and Sun picked it up, accidentally seeing a call from someone named Wu Fong. He answered the phone, simply saying that this was Ling Yi's phone, and she had forgotten it. then hung up, his eyes full of doubt. How did she know someone like Wu Fong? Later, when the people from the Kuan Jai group left the bar and got into the car, and Sun, who was about to step in, saw Ling quietly walking down the street. She was dressed in ordinary clothes, looking lonely. He told the others to go ahead, then followed her to return the phone. Before giving it back, he made her say thank you. Ling bowed her head and thanked him, then gently advised him to go home early, lest his girlfriend get angry. Hearing that, and Sun calmly said that his girlfriend was dead. That statement made her pause, only knowing how to silently apologize, take the phone, and leave. The next morning, Ling went to the police station to meet Wu Fong. When asked why she was working at the bar, she honestly admitted that she hadn't been accepted anywhere else. Wu Fong asked why she had voluntarily confessed to having been in prison. She replied that if she had to leave later because they found out about her past, the hurt would be even greater. Hearing that, he gave her the business card of the manager of a hotel where he had previously spoken on her behalf, so that she could start a new job. Ling emotionally thanked him. Just then, Sun and Entai also walked in. Entai's voice was full of sarcasm when he saw that she knew a police officer. Ling didn't hide her past, calmly admitting that she had been in prison. And it was Wu Fong who had cared for her and helped her during that time. The honesty surprised Entai, and in Senator, they asked why she went to prison, and she replied coldly that it was for murder. Entai laughed mockingly, saying that the training skills in prison made her words so sharp. Wu Fong spoke up to clarify that she killed someone in self-defense, which couldn't be equated with intentional murder. However, Entai still continued to mock, even sarcastically saying that now Ling wasn't Sen's woman. It wasn't the police's turn to interfere. Not wanting to push things further, Ling took the initiative to pull Wu Fong out of there. When it was just the two of them, Entai quietly reminded Sun to be careful with this girl. He said that she was not only close to Wu Fong, but was also the type of person who wouldn't stop at anything. The more beautiful she was, the more dangerous. According to him, she was no different from their sister-in-law. Hearing that, Sun only smiled faintly, saying thank you as a way to end the conversation, but his eyes were full of thought. Elena, Boss and Cohen's wife, angrily stomped her high heels on the face of a subordinate kneeling on the floor. Her rage soared when she learned that the important shipment hadn't been followed through on as planned. The subordinate trembled, saying that Boss and Cohen had changed the plan at the last minute. The answer made her even angrier. Just then, Sun and Entai walked in. Seeing the scene before them, Entai not only didn't stop it, but also calmly punched him a few more times, then bent down to wipe his sister-in-law's shoes to soothe her anger. Elena didn't want the matter spread, so she eventually let it go. On the same day, through the introduction of police officer Wu Fong, Ling began working as a server at the hotel. While working, she accidentally opened the door to her room, thinking it was empty, but encountered Sun, who had just stepped out of the bathroom. Not surprised, he teasingly flirted with her, while she only hoped that he would dress properly so she could finish cleaning. Finally, he went back in to change as she wished. In another scene, Boss and Kuan and his wife were talking tensely. Elena recounted the things she had done to help her husband advance, expressing dissatisfaction that he had recently made changes in the company without informing her. Before the complaints were finished, Boss and Kuan grabbed his wife by the neck, reminding her not to mention the past. Elena, frightened, immediately promised not to do it again and quickly told him that there was a strange girl currently around in Senator Boss and Cohen, who knew that Sun had been single since the death of his fiancée, was curious that a beauty had now appeared by his side. After finishing cleaning, Sun gave Ling a key and a piece of paper with an address on it, saying that it was a thank you gift. Taking it, she silently pondered the real purpose behind this action. Despite her doubts, she decided to go to the place. One of Entai's group secretly followed her. This was also part of Sen's calculations. At the same time, Sun secretly slipped a piece of paper into a mailbox nearby. Ling following the address, found the place, opened the box, and discovered a box inside. But before she could check it, a man named Bai unexpectedly appeared, gagged her, and kidnapped her. She was taken to meet directly with Boss and Kuan and his wife, Elena. Contrary to expectations, Ling didn't show any fear. She knew well that she had nothing valuable enough to be ransomed. That calm attitude made Boss and Kuan feel amused. The man Bai handed over the box, saying that she had come from Sen's room with suspicious behavior and was definitely hiding something. Ling denied it, affirming that she hadn't opened the box before being brought here. Elena impatiently opened the lid of the box and was angry when she saw that the inside was just a stuffed animal. In a fit of anger, she was about to slap Ling when Sun appeared just in time to stop her. He pretended not to understand what had made his sister-in-law so angry. Boss and Kun laughed, saying that after so many years of being single, Sun was suddenly back in the game, so he had to act on his behalf to rate it. He commented that Ling Yi's appearance was beautiful, but her heart was difficult to guess, and it would take time to get to know her better. Sun immediately explained that the box was just an unexpected gift he had given Ling Yi, and he didn't expect it to cause such a misunderstanding. Ling Yi also cooperated, taking the initiative to apologize to Elena, thanks to which the tense atmosphere gradually eased. Boss and Kun and his wife, Elena, then left. Ba was tied tightly to a pole, enduring hot whippings on his back, blood mixed with tears, constantly begging for forgiveness. He promised not to repeat it, but Sun only coldly approached, emphasizing that what he hated most was two-faced people. He warned him with every word that there would be no second chance. As soon as the words were spoken, his eyes were full of fear. Sun turned and left to pick up Ling Yi, personally taking her all the way home. On the way, he didn't forget to apologize, because he also hadn't expected things to become like that. Ling Yi replied that they were even, words that were light, but made him pay more attention to her. Before leaving, Sun also took the opportunity to take a picture of her standing on the stairs, capturing a moment for some unknown reason, which made Ling even more confused. That night, alone in her small room, she looked back at an old photo taken with the person who had passed away. The memories of the past resurfaced, haunting her. It was a dark night when a group of gangsters broke into the house, smashing things and questioning her about something her aunt was hiding. She didn't understand what they wanted, only knowing that she was pulled back and choked until she couldn't breathe. In that life or death moment, she grabbed a broken piece of pottery on the ground, stabbing it hard into the neck of the person holding her. He died on the spot, his blood spreading across the floor like a warning of how ruthless the forces behind the name Kuinjai were. The next day, she returned to work at the hotel. Thinking the room was empty, she opened the door and stepped inside to clean. Unexpectedly, a guest was still there. He saw her and had bad intentions. Under that lustful gaze, she panicked, immediately making the excuse that she was Sin's woman to escape. But he only laughed scornfully, saying that a girl doing cleaning work had nothing that would catch Sin's eye. In the chaos, she grabbed a hard object, hitting him hard on the head, and then ran away. Just as she reached the hallway, she encountered Senator. His cold gaze made the pervert immediately cower. He hadn't expected that this building had already been entirely taken over by the Kuinjai group. Knowing what had happened, Sun only sighed and then said that if someone had taken a little advantage, they couldn't let them take it for free. He told her to just say what she wanted. The man seemed to understand and immediately ran in, bringing out a card with 200,000 yuan already on it. As an apology, then hurriedly closed the door and hid. Ling Yi stood there, confused, handing the card back to Sun, saying that she had never held so much money and didn't know how to use it, so it was better not to accept it. Hearing that, Sun only smirked and replied that if she didn't know how to spend money, he would teach her. He took her to a high-end shopping mall, making her choose clothes according to her preferences. He said he thought her sense of style was poor, but he constantly took candid photos as if not wanting to miss a single moment. That cool and slightly childish demeanor made her only shake her head helplessly. Standing at the door, he suddenly remembered the call from police officer Wu Fong that morning. A new mission was about to begin, requiring him to temporarily avoid contact for a few days. When Ling Yi stepped out in a new outfit, looking completely different from her usual appearance, he finally cracked a rare smile and nodded in satisfaction. Without hesitation, he bought everything she had tried on, then called someone to book 2 plane tickets to Ningchong. Ling Yi, looking at the ticket in her hand, recognized that this could be an opportunity to get closer to Sun, so she agreed to go with him without hesitation. The fact that he suddenly took Ling Yi on a trip without reporting it quickly reached Boss and Kuin's ears. With work piling up, Sun leaving his position made Boss and Kun extremely angry. Entai, Boss and Kuin's younger brother, seeing this, immediately chimed in, confidently saying that even without Sun, everything could still be resolved, even saying that he could handle it easily. Hearing his younger brother say that, Boss and Kun finally nodded in agreement, allowing Entai to replace him, making him so happy he couldn't hide it and jumped up and down for joy. Elsewhere, Ling, and Sun had arrived in Ningchong. They quickly checked into a hotel. When she entered the room, she was surprised to see that there was only one bed. And Sun seemed pleased with himself, approaching and teasing her, making her realize that he was just joking. So she took the initiative to say that she would sleep on the inside, while he could take the sofa. That night, Sun took her for a walk on the streets of Ningchong, buy her a lot of snacks to try. The two laughed and talked happily, not expecting that the shadow from the past would unexpectedly appear. Song Rong, Ling Yi's ex-boyfriend, suddenly showed up, seeing her walking next to a strange man. He immediately sarcastically questioned why she had chosen to be with someone like a senator under the guise of caring. He said that if she encountered difficulties, she could come find him. But Ling didn't bother to respond. In her heart, the old wounds never healed. The one who had promised to be by her side was the first to turn his back and run away when she needed him most. She resolutely left, not wanting to hear another apology. Song Rong tried to follow, but Sun stepped in, blocking him and firmly declaring that Ling was his woman, and he wouldn't let her suffer any more harm. That decisive warning made Song Rong not dare to say another word, only knowing how to retreat in silence. Ling sat quietly in a corner, her heart heavy, sweet and bitter memories flooding back. She had loved Song Rong, had absolutely believed in him, only to one day discover that he was cheating and betraying her. Now, seeing him again made her heart ache, and she couldn't control her tears. And Sun, seeing her like that, quietly left for a moment, then returned with a little boy holding a small frog. The boy excitedly handed the frog to Ling, saying that it was a sorrowful frog, and whoever owned it would be relieved of all their worries. Ling gently took the gift, thanking the boy, her heart suddenly warming up. And Sun took her hand, returning to the hotel with her. That night, the two shared a space, each taking a corner to sleep, maintaining temporary peace. But the peace didn't last long. At dawn, Boss and Cohen called directly, announcing that the plan had changed and requiring Sun to return immediately. The very next morning, he was on a yacht with Entai to carry out an important drug deal. But this time, things didn't go smoothly. The police suddenly arrived, and the entire group immediately fell into chaos. A breathtaking chase like in an action movie took place on the high seas. While the subordinates were confused, not knowing what to do, Sun ordered them to destroy all the goods. A large quantity of drugs was thrown into the sea, drifting with the waves. But not long after, the police had caught up, controlling the entire group of people on the boat, forcing everyone to sit still and wait to be dealt with. No one had a way out. In her restless sleep, Ling suddenly fell into a nightmare. She dreamed that the person she loved most was pushed into a deep abyss by a bad person, dying wrongfully. The pain from a dream made her jolt awake in the middle of the night, taking a long time to calm down. She stepped out of the room and saw that Sun was no longer there. Only a table of food had been prepared, along with a message he had left. His absence made the room feel empty, but everything was still tidy, enough to soothe her recently panicked heart. On the other side, in another place, tension was rising, and Tai still couldn't understand why the recent transaction had been ambushed by the police unexpectedly. Only 3 names came to his mind who knew the time and location, and he, Boss and Kuen's blood brother, couldn't possibly be the one to single-handedly destroy everything. Suspicion immediately turned to Senator. Even so, Sun didn't let him speculate. He retorted, recalling the times he had been personally assigned transportation missions by Boss and Kuen himself, without any mistakes ever occurring. Only when everything was handed over to Entai did everything fall apart. The atmosphere quickly became tense. Words exchanged rapidly. Responsibility was pushed back and forth, and the anger caused Entai to lose control. He swung a bottle of wine, hitting Sun hard on the head, causing blood to gush out. Boss and Kuen had to quickly intervene, pulling Entai away and apologizing on behalf of his younger brother. Under the layer of a cold face was real worry. A large order had been lost. The heavy losses meant the company was facing the risk of collapse. But that apology wasn't enough to soothe Sun's hurt. He coldly asked back if, after so many years, he still couldn't earn the absolute trust from the person he had always seen as a confidant. Boss and Kuen at this time slowly replied that he had always considered Sun as family and had never doubted his character. They were both on the same boat. If Sun had any schemes, it would be no different than pushing himself into the abyss. Those words seemed to have calmed the undercurrents, and suspicion temporarily subsided. That night, Sun secretly met with Officer Wu Fong. It turned out that he was originally an undercover police officer planted in the underworld to infiltrate and dismantle the entire large-scale drug trafficking ring. Realizing that Sun was beginning to be suspected, Wu Fong gave him a secret communication device in case the situation became dangerous. The following night, Sun went to Ling Yi's house. When he stepped inside, he slowly observed every corner. A photo placed neatly on the shelf made him stop. Memories suddenly flooded back when he recognized that it was the woman he had met before, also the aunt that Ling Yi had mentioned. Just then, the light bulb in the room flickered. Seeing her struggling to reach it, he immediately picked her up to help fix it. The sudden closeness made the atmosphere silent, and her breathing became cautious and flustered. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Boss Kuen's assistant handed Sun the phone to hear a call from Boss Kuen. This time, Boss Kuen asked Sun to bring Ling Yi to work at the company. A light, high-paying job had been arranged, just so she wouldn't have to live in that old, dilapidated room anymore. Sun took the order, promising to arrange everything properly. Bai continued, saying that Boss Kuen's sister-in-law was also working there. It was all in order to create better conditions for Senator hearing that Ling Yi, without any hesitation, expressed her desire to work at the company. Not only because of the invitation, but because in her heart she carried a deep-seated reason to find out the truth behind the cryptic death of her beloved relative in the past. Ling Yi was driven home by Senator when they arrived. Bai, who had come along, helped her with her suitcase, then asked Sun where he should put it. To maintain his facade, Sun had no choice but to feign affection, asking Bai to take the luggage to his bedroom. As soon as Bai left, he explained that it was all just acting, telling her to rest assured that tonight she would sleep in the main room, while he would temporarily stay in the living room. She said nothing, only silently stepping inside, beginning to tidy up the bed and arrange her clothes to prepare for bed. That night, Sun tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. The memory of the first time he had met Ling Yi's aunt replayed in his head, a strange feeling that he couldn't explain. Not wanting to disturb her, he went to the living room and poured himself a glass of wine to calm his mind. Unexpectedly, Ling Yi stepped out with a face mask still on, making him jump so much that he almost spilled his glass. Seeing that reaction, she promised not to put on a face mask in front of him again. The atmosphere between the two thus became lighter. He smiled and poured another glass of wine, inviting her. The two sat in silence, momentarily peaceful. The next morning, Sun took her to Kuen Jai's company, which was also where her deceased aunt had worked. In the office, Entai continued to express his suspicion about Sun, saying that he was the most suspicious person. However, Boss Kuen maintained his position, continuing to trust Sun completely. This time, to avoid risk, Boss Kuen decided to personally go to receive a shipment, instead of entrusting it to anyone. That decision made Entai angry, feeling that he wasn't valued, even though he was his own younger brother. Ling Yi went to the balcony, from which she could see the place where her aunt had jumped. That scene startled her, her mind filled with fear and pain. Just then, Entai stepped in. His tone was full of sarcasm, saying that while he was busy to the point of exhaustion, Sun had time to embrace love. He emphasized that the current situation was extremely difficult. The police were checking strictly. The people who had been arranged from 2 days ago would have to be recruited into the official team. With his position as a backbone in the company, Sun had to think of a way to deal with it soon. In front of Ling Yi, Entai unexpectedly mentioned the loss of an important shipment not long ago, a serious loss that made him certain there was an inside agent in the organization. He probed, wanting her, the woman who was said to be intelligent, to make a judgment and help him find the traitor. Ling Yi only gently replied that with her IQ, tracking down the inside agent might be too much, but if they played the card game 3 Kingdoms Kill, perhaps they could catch the traitor more quickly. Having said that, she turned and left. Unexpectedly, she received a video call from its senator on the screen. His expression was more serious than ever. He instructed her to go to Happiness Village to receive a shipment, not to let anyone know, and to immediately lock her phone afterward. Though confused, she still followed his instructions, immediately calling a taxi and leaving. At this time, Sun realized that something was wrong. He called her again, but no one answered. Sensing that something was wrong, he quickly sped off in his car to follow. When he arrived and saw that she was about to pick up the shipment, he frantically ran over, asking why her phone was locked. She replied in surprise that wasn't that what he had asked her to do? In that very moment, Sun immediately understood that it was all a scam, a trap set by Entai. Immediately upon discovering the entire scheme, Sun took Ling back home. Before she could get out of the car, he reminded her to go home and buy medicine and to wait for him to return, because he had never liked going to the hospital and he didn't want her to worry. At this moment, having given his instructions, he turned and left, preparing for an unavoidable confrontation with Entai. Because she had been tricked by him using AI technology in his name, he couldn't hold back any longer. The clash between Sun and Entai erupted fiercely. He charged in, landing a powerful punch that made Entai stagger. Neither would yield. They engaged in a brawl in the middle of the company yard. But to Sun, Entai's subordinates were no different from a bunch of kids, whoever dared to charge and was beaten badly. Meanwhile, Entai remained arrogant, saying that the Kuan-Jai group, from beginning to end, had to listen to him, and that Sun was nothing. As the conflict reached its peak, Boss and Kuan unexpectedly appeared, driving in with Elena and Ling. Just getting out of the car, he was extremely angry to see his subordinates turning the company into a place for fighting, becoming a laughingstock in the eyes of outsiders. Entai still wouldn't let it go, declaring that he had sent people to steal the company's goods. Sun didn't let Ling explain. He stepped in front of Boss and Kuan, calmly saying that he couldn't continue to stay in this place anymore. Throughout the years, he had never done anything to betray Kuan-Jai, and he could live or die for it. To prove it, he pulled a gun from his person, handed it to Boss and Kuan, then pointed it straight at his forehead. He said that this life was given to him by Boss Kuan, and now the Boss Kuan had the right to decide everything. Boss and Kuan silently looked at him, finally throwing the gun away with force. He couldn't let someone like Sun be ruined just because of a false accusation. Seeing Sun about to take Ling and leave, Entai unexpectedly fired a shot. The shot tore through the tense atmosphere, but luckily didn't hit anyone. Boss and Kuan angrily slapped Entai across the face, condemning his action of daring to shoot his own people. Elena at this time also spoke up, saying that the second young master had been incited by bad people and needed to take a look at the people next to him. With no other choice, Entai angrily withdrew his forces, leading his men away. Boss and Kuan then approached, returning the gun to Sun and patting him on the shoulder, clearly showing that his trust remained intact. Returning home, Ling carefully applied medicine to the wounds covering Sun's body. Looking at him like that, she couldn't hide her heartache. But to Sun, those things had become a part of his destiny. Even if you get a bad hand, you still have to fight to the end, even having to fight beautifully. To him, that was courage. Ling softly said that the people who really loved him would never want him to live so hard. Those words made Sun laugh, but the smile carried a bitter taste. Without saying anything more, he quietly stood up and went to his room. In the quiet space, Sun let himself drift into memory. He recalled a mission in the past, where the woman he had loved, his soon-to-be fiancée, had died right before his eyes on the battlefield. That moment remained deeply etched in his heart as a pain that would never fade. Sitting alone in his room, Sun surrendered himself to the darkness, letting the pain pour out through each stifled sob. The next morning, Ling arrived at the company in a peaceful mood, but unexpectedly witnessed a horrifying scene. She discovered the incestuous relationship between the younger brother and his sister-in-law, Elena. The scene before her shocked her so much that she unconsciously took a step back, her heel lightly hitting the door behind her. That small sound immediately alerted Elena. She quickly ran out to investigate. Luckily, Sun had appeared in time, pulling Ling to hide behind a filing cabinet, preventing her from being discovered. Not seeing anyone, Entai spoke casually, as if everything here was in the palm of his hand. On the car leaving the company, Sun glanced at Ling, reminding her that curiosity can sometimes cost you your life. Ling hurriedly explained that it was all just a coincidence. She had accidentally passed by and hadn't intended to. But Sun knew that Elena was a suspicious person and wouldn't easily let things go smoothly. He immediately asked her to call Ms. informing her that the two would be going there, in order to divert suspicion if anyone had any doubts. Sure enough, Sun's intuition was correct. Though not seeing anything clearly, Elena still held suspicion in her heart. She immediately called Sun, asking where he was. When she learned that he was at the bar with Ling, the suspicion in her hadn't been erased. She decided to go there herself to verify. Stepping into the bar, Elena saw Sun and Ling each chatting happily with each other, the atmosphere light and comfortable. Ms. E quickly understood the situation and pulled Ling outside to leave private space for the two of them. Unexpectedly, a drunken man approached and harassed her. While she was confused, not yet reacting, another man, who was her ex-boyfriend, appeared. He charged in and fought with the drunk, creating a chaotic scene. Her cries echoed into the room, which Sun heard. He immediately ran out to see what was happening. When he saw that Ling Yi's hand was injured, with fresh red blood dripping out, he didn't say a word, only quietly pulling her away to treat the wound. She smiled playfully, saying that every time she looked disheveled, she happened to run into him. While the two were joking around in a moment of intimacy, Elena appeared with a haughty expression, leaving a message that she was having a lot of fun tonight and will be taking a few of Sun's belongings, telling him to remember to come and get them another day. Ling Yi, hearing that, her eyes suddenly darkened. She couldn't help but feel suspicion in her heart. The intimacy between Elena and Sun made her unable to stop thinking. On the way back, that worry still lingered in her. Arriving home, when entering the room, the two discovered that the electrical system had unexpectedly been cut off. Sun immediately signaled her to keep quiet, then observed the entire room to make sure that nothing was amiss. Upon confirming that everything was safe, he turned around and saw Ling sitting huddled in the darkness. The frightened look in her eyes made him realize that she was very afraid of the dark. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and took her hand, conveying reassurance with his calm presence. While he was calling an electrician, Ling quietly hugged him from behind, whispering a thank you. The atmosphere suddenly became warm and romantic, as if the storms outside were temporarily blocked out. When the lights suddenly flickered back on, Sun led her out to the living room, he decided that he would personally go into the kitchen to cook a special dinner. Ling was surprised to see that someone like Sun, who came from the underworld, could cook so skillfully. He recounted that in his younger years at Kuanjai, he didn't have any money, so he had to teach himself how to cook in order to survive. Now, if she wanted to cook herself, the kitchen and everything in this house were free for her to use. This place, he said, she should consider her home. Hearing that, Ling was touched. Since she was little, after her parents passed away, she had always longed for a home of her own, where she truly belonged. She had lived with her aunt, but that person had also passed away. Sun, seeing the deep sadness in her eyes, spoke up to comfort her, saying that he would always be by her side from now on. The two sat together to eat in the rare warmth amidst stormy days. As night fell in the private room, Sun quietly took out the phone that Officer Wu Fong had given him before. After hesitating for a while, he decided to call Wu Fong. The voice on the other end of the line seriously reported that the big boss might have arrived at the border. Sun sighed, admitting that Entai was now no different from a mad dog, acting increasingly recklessly. The worst thing was that the big boss seemed to no longer trust him. Wu Fong clearly understood the dangerous situation, but still emphasized that Sun needed to confirm the time and location of the transaction. Sun nodded, promising to find a way soon. The next morning, while Ling was cleaning the living room, Elena unexpectedly appeared. Her eyes glanced over Ling with a contemptuous and assessing gaze, saying something sarcastic about her beauty. Then, in a deliberate action, Elena knocked the vase to the floor. While bending down to clean up the broken pieces, Ling accidentally saw a small USB attached to the good luck charm, a gift she had once given her aunt. Her heart suddenly tightened. When Sun walked in, he immediately checked to see if she had been injured, then gently offered to help her clean up. But in Ling Yi's heart at this time, only one question quietly echoed. Why did my aunt's USB appear here? Returning to her room in a state of turmoil, Ling immediately opened the USB that she had accidentally found. However, the device required a password. She patiently tried many times, entering all the familiar sequences, important anniversaries, even her aunt's name, but all in vain. Elsewhere, Sun was at Boss and Cohen's villa. His purpose was simply to retrieve the jacket he had forgotten last time, but his appearance immediately caught Elena's attention. She stepped forward, her eyes sharp and provocative, then bluntly questioned his recklessness in daring to come back here. Sun only calmly replied that he had no reason to be afraid, because he had only come to get his jacket, nothing more. Elena seemed to be intentionally prolonging the meeting. She poured wine, then pretended to accidentally spill it on Sun. That action was clearly an excuse for her to get closer, with the intention of taking off his jacket. But Sun, though clearly aware of that trick, still let her approach. When the boundaries were blurred, Elena didn't hesitate to pull him into the room, her eyes revealing her ambition. She pushed him onto the bed, her hands skillfully caressing him, beginning to unbutton his shirt, whispering sweet words full of calculation. But Sun wasn't easily swayed. He reminded her of the risk that if Boss and Kuan suddenly walked in, everything would spiral out of control. Elena wasn't afraid at all. On the contrary, she affirmed that if he was afraid, he wouldn't have dared to set foot in here. She frankly revealed that this time, Boss and Kuan had personally gone to pick up the shipment, demonstrating that suspicion had begun to creep in. According to her, Khan had never truly trusted anyone, and therefore, among those being suspected, they could only help each other if they wanted to survive. That suggestion was clearly a tacit bargain, but Sun didn't respond. He quietly stood up and left the room, his expression cold and resolute, leaving Elena alone. When he reached the car, his eyes became gloomier than ever. At that moment, a subordinate secretly called Entai, reporting that Sun had just left Boss and Kuan's house, and it was unclear what he had discussed with Elena. That information added fuel to the fire of the suspicions that were smoldering. Sun, after leaving, drove around through many streets, his head heavy with the mission he was carrying on his shoulders. Information about the time and location of the transaction still had no clear leads. When he returned home, his steps were no longer steady. Ling discovered it, hurriedly helping him to the room, but he was so drunk that he couldn't stand, only collapsing onto the sofa, sleeping soundly and unaware of anything. Suddenly, the phone rang. Ling looked at the screen, hesitating for a moment, then answered. On the other end of the line was Elena, with a meaningful tone. Knowing that Sun was drunk and unconscious, Elena only asked her to pass on the message that there was a card in the pocket of his suit jacket that needed to be returned to him, while also telling him to call her back tomorrow. Hanging up, Ling stealthily went to the suit jacket. When she opened the pocket and pulled out the card, her eyes immediately drooped, and a feeling that was hard to describe, mixed with disappointment, rose in her heart. She couldn't understand her own emotions, only knowing that her heart felt heavy. Perhaps she was jealous. She turned to look at Sun, the man sleeping soundly on the sofa after his tired drunkenness, and her eyes stopped at his face, her troubled heart now understanding everything. Early in the morning, Sun woke up with a heavy head. He hurriedly put on his jacket, his mind still clouded with alcohol. When he turned around, his eyes met the image of Ling sitting asleep next to him. Her face was strangely peaceful amidst the silent scene. He gently picked her up and put her on the bed, carefully covering her with a blanket as a silent way to express his gratitude. But that action couldn't escape Ling Yi's notice. She was only pretending to sleep. Just as she was placed on the bed, she immediately sat up and gave him the card from the pocket of his suit jacket that Elena had mentioned. He took it, nodding in thanks for her care last night. Soon after, Sun went to meet Elena. Without beating around the bush, he expressed his intention to cooperate. Contrary to his seriousness, Elena only smirked, her eyes full of implication. She stepped forward and sat in his lap in a provocative way, unhesitatingly creating an ambiguous and private space. She proposed that she wanted to become the big boss and wanted to pull him to her side to achieve that goal. The conversation was cut short by a call. It was Boss and Kuan, his voice cold from the other end of the line, announcing that this shipment might encounter trouble, requiring him to quickly gather together. Without hesitation, Sun immediately accepted. At the same time, at Sin's apartment, an unexpected event occurred. Entai, Boss and Kuan's trusted subordinate, let a few men straight in. His eyes darted around, then stopped on Ling Yi. His tone was arrogant, pressuring her, asking where Sun was, and if he was looking for his sister-in-law. Ling Yi tried to remain calm, softly replying that she had only asked Sun to buy her some sweets because she was craving them. But those words didn't get past the ears of someone who was full of suspicion and resentment. Entai smiled faintly, saying that Boss and Kuan hadn't been around lately, while Sun had been visiting Elena every day. The two were in the same room, so whatever happened wasn't hard to guess. In a fit of anger, Entai lunged at Ling Yi, intending to force himself on her to satisfy his twisted sense of revenge. Panicked by that ferocity, Ling Yi was forced to plead. She earnestly said that she would help him keep an eye on Sun, promising that if there was any suspicious activity, she would immediately report back. The plea made him stop. He was giving her a chance, not because he trusted her, but because he wanted to see if she had any value that could be exploited. Before leaving, he coldly left a phone number, along with a clear threat that if she dared to play any tricks, the price she would pay would be her life. Ling stood frozen in the silent room, fear still quietly engulfing her. And Sen started his day with a call to Officer Wu. He informed him that the time and location of the transaction had been sent, urging the police to act quickly. After the call, Sun returned home. Contrary to expectations, he encountered Ling Yi's worried expression and uneasy eyes. When asked, she recounted that Entai had come by. A look of suspicion mixed with fear flashed through her eyes as she mentioned that Entai seemed to have discovered the relationship between him and Elena. Seeing the wound on her hand, his heart sank, and the words he couldn't say suddenly caught in his throat. Even so, he could only gently hug her, comforting her that there were things he couldn't explain clearly, but he hoped she wouldn't be afraid and would trust him. After the brief hug, he reassured Ling that he had to go on a business trip because the company was very busy. This time, it might be a long time before he returned. Before leaving, he gave her a bank card as a little peace of mind left behind. In his heart, he quietly said a farewell that he didn't dare to say aloud. However, what he didn't expect was Ling Yi's determination. As soon as he started the car, she suddenly blocked the front of the car and stepped right in, resolutely declaring that wherever he went, she would follow. To her, danger wasn't a reason to back down, but only made her more unable to leave him. Faced with that stubbornness, Sun had to yield. The car rolled across the empty roads, heading towards the endless stretch of white sand. When they arrived, the wheels suddenly got stuck. Jingshi immediately got out to scoop sand to rescue the car, while Sun took Ling Yi to a higher ground, where they could see the entire sunset. In a rare moment of peace amidst the chaotic days, he wanted to enjoy the tranquility of heaven and earth with her, like a small gift before the storm that awaited ahead. At the same time, at the rendezvous point, Boss and Kuan had arrived to conduct the delivery. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the other side suddenly opened fire. The transaction shattered, and both sides immediately plunged into a fierce gunfight, the smoke and gunfire echoing throughout the barren land. Boss and Kuan didn't have time to react and hastily fled in the chaos. At that precise moment, Sun also arrived. He instructed Ling to stay in the car and not to move under any circumstances. Quietly approaching the combat zone himself, he hid behind a crumbling wall, quickly identifying the enemy's location. In an instant, he plunged into the battlefield, firing accurately, attacking decisively. In the rain of bullets, Boss and Kuan was hit multiple times, his body collapsing onto the cold ground, blood spreading in patches. Ling Yi also rushed into the hail of bullets, gun in hand, resolutely pulling the trigger, aiming at the one who was about to fire at his senator when he saw her appear, and Sen didn't have time to be surprised, only managed to rush over and pull her away amidst the swirling sand. Even though his hand was hit by a bullet, even though blood stained his clothes, he continued to drag her with him, a smile of reassurance on his lips, as if the pain gnawing at every fiber of his flesh was not worth worrying about. But Ling Yi couldn't be as calm as him. She panicked when she realized his body was getting colder and his breathing was becoming labored. A series of dangers suddenly flashed through her mind. If something had happened to Boss and Kuan, Entai would surely push all the responsibility onto Sun. And at this moment, the police were frantically searching everywhere. Elsewhere, the bad news about Boss and Kuan quickly reached Entai's ears, and he couldn't hide his glee, a cruel smile spreading across his mouth. But Elena, who had discussed things with him before, immediately reminded him of the previous agreement. In response, Entai uttered a bitter, sarcastic remark, believing that women shouldn't harbor great ambitions because it would only bring them trouble. Insulted, Elena angrily slapped him, then left, not forgetting to leave a warning that he would pay the price. On the small boat drifting on the river, Ling Yi sat beside him, continuously calling him not to fall asleep because of the wound. She was waiting at the pier and immediately took them to a safe place and called a doctor. But because there was no anesthetic, Sun had to endure the intense pain as the doctor pulled out the bullet, after which he fainted from blood loss and pain. A while later, he woke up. Seeing him open his eyes, Ling Yi smiled softly. Sun's appearance at this time was tired, his face pale and dusty, far from the neat and tidy image she usually saw. She gently wiped his face for him, an action that made him wonder if she was worried about him. But instead of admitting it, Ling got angry. She blamed him for always making decisions on his own, regardless of danger, and not caring about his body or the worries of others. And Sun gently squeezed her hand, his words gentle but full of determination. He told her not to be angry, that death was inevitable, but he still knew where to draw the line. This wound was just a small matter. He was still alive, still here, and that was already something to be thankful for. At that moment, Officer Wu also appeared. He couldn't hide his anger, but when he received a silent nod from his son, he immediately softened his tone and told her that everything that was happening was within the scope of special mission. She was no longer an outsider, but had inadvertently become part of this uncompromising war. Ling was stunned after what she had just witnessed. A great shock surged in her when she learned that Sun was participating in a secret mission that she had been completely unaware of all this time. Officer Wu recognized that confused state, but only said calmly that there were many things that couldn't be revealed at the moment. Then, Officer Wu turned to Sun and announced the bad news. Kun was dead, and the gang had also been arrested. This made the tide lean completely towards them, but at the same time pushed Entai and Elena into a passive position. Therefore, Sun was forced to continue to maintain his cover. The mask he was wearing couldn't be taken off at this time. After speaking, he immediately left to avoid causing more danger. That night, in his restless sleep, Sun fell into a nightmare again. He dreamed that Kun was angry at being betrayed, raising his gun and shooting at Ling. In a panic, he woke up, his whole body covered in cold sweat. Ling gently soothed him to let him know that she was still here, always by his side. That moment caused the two of them to be drawn together. Even though Sun was still injured, the repressed emotions of so long, like a flame catching a gust of wind, quickly burst into flames. They clung to each other in a night that was not peaceful, but full of emotion, as if to reassure themselves amidst the dangers that were waiting ahead. The next morning, Ling quietly leaned her head on Sun's shoulder, her eyes filled with sadness. She confessed that from beginning to end, she was the one who had taken the initiative to approach. Even though he was always the one protecting her, it was she who had deliberately stepped into his life for another purpose. Sun was silent for a moment, then admitted that he had known everything for a long time. From the time he came to her house and saw the photo she took with Nan, he understood. From then on, he began to secretly investigate Nan Yi's death, but all traces were vague. Even so, the most important thing for him was still the present, and therefore, he wanted both of them to cherish the moments they had. At the same time, Elena came to see Sun. He didn't hesitate to ask if Kun's death had anything to do with her, but Elena only responded with a counter-question, believing that at this point, assigning responsibility was no longer too important. Entai had taken over the entire group, and she was falling into a weak position and losing control. Looking straight at Sun, she admitted that he was an intelligent person, and therefore, she would not take advantage of this chaotic moment to drag him in. However, she still made an offer. If he could return to her side and face Entai together, the situation might be different. Before leaving, she only left a message that he should think carefully, and she would wait for his answer. Ling fell into a restless sleep, dreaming that Sun left her to choose Elena. She woke up startled in the middle of the night, a feeling of unease surging in her heart. When she saw Sun just walked in, she immediately wanted to mark her territory, not letting him fall into the hands of another woman. Just then, Elena also appeared, offering to take Sun to see a private doctor to check his wound again. In the car, Elena shared with Sun that Entai had taken control of the entire Kuinjai group. If they continued to remain silent, they would soon lose everything. Although she used to act independently without caring about his opinion, she would change now. At the same time, at the Kuinjai group, Entai convened a meeting of the shareholders, declaring that his older brother had conspired to betray, and his sister-in-law had disappeared near the border, her life or death unknown. He emphasized that the group could not be without a leader and promised not to disappoint everyone. Suddenly, Sun and Elena walked into the meeting room. Before their appearance, Entai immediately spoke up, falsely accusing that the two had colluded to kill Khan. Elena countered, questioning his true ability and believing that a person like Entai was completely unworthy of running the group. Sun spoke calmly, believing that the company was in a moment of life and death and urgently needed a reasonable solution if they didn't want the shareholders to intervene. A shareholder in the room agreed, proposing that within 3 days, whoever could come up with the most feasible plan would be elected as the head of the group. This proposal made Entai extremely angry. Elena seized the opportunity to whisper in his ear, subtly reminding him that it was she who had put his older brother in the leadership position years ago. In another development, Ling was suddenly taken into a car by 2 strangers. The mastermind behind the kidnapping was none other than Entai. Realizing that she was no longer a value to exploit because Sun had leaned toward Elena, he planned to eliminate her. Ling despaired but quickly asked for another chance, challenging that if Sun really didn't care anymore, then he should just let him try to call. Entai did as she predicted, and Sun immediately answered the phone. Through his reaction, Entai understood that Ling was still a weakness in Sun's heart. He immediately changed his plan, preparing the next insidious step. Sun immediately rushed to where Entai was holding Ling. Before his eyes was she tied up, looking tired. Facing Sun's angry gaze, Entai coldly made a deal. If Sun ended his alliance with Elena, allowing him to smoothly become the boss of the Kuenjai group, then he would return Ling intact as before. After that sentence, he removed the tape from Ling Yi's mouth. Ling immediately told Sun that Elena had never been a kind person. Every time she witnessed Elena taking advantage of Sun, she felt angry. She earnestly reminded him to remember what was most important. After that, Entai ordered Sun to go back and prepare for the upcoming meeting of the shareholders. Reluctantly, he had to leave in silence. Ling was taken into Entai's private room. When she looked around, she accidentally discovered some photos hidden in the pile of books. Those photos were of Elena together with someone she used to know, looking very intimate, which made her suspect about the relationship between the two. Just then, Entai walked in, and Ling quickly hid the photos. He handed her a glass of wine, laughing, saying that they should cooperate happily. The next morning, at the shareholders' meeting, Elena presented a plan to rescue the company that was assessed as reasonable and effective. When the shareholders were about to declare the transfer of management to her, suddenly everyone unanimously received a text message. The content shocked them. Their relatives had all been captured by Entai. While the entire hall fell into chaos, Entai calmly stepped up, declaring that if he hadn't prepared in advance, he would have been defeated by Sun and Elena long ago. Now, the rules of the game belonged to him. Faced with the forced situation, a shareholder stood up and officially declared Entai as the head of the Kuenjai group. Elena was completely defeated in anger. She shouted, asking Sun to think of a way to salvage the situation, but he didn't respond, only quietly turned away, leaving Elena in despair. At the same time, Entai returned with a triumphant look. Ling noticed that and sarcastically remarked that, judging by his joyful appearance, he must have been chosen as the boss. She deliberately taunted him to probe the situation, but Entai immediately threw a bucket of cold water. The fact that he was chosen had nothing to do with her. Currently, Sun only cared about Elena, and she had no value to exploit. If he hadn't prepared carefully, he might have fallen into their trap. After taking control, Entai ordered his subordinates to humiliate Ling at will. When one of them was about to act, Sun suddenly broke in through the window, landing a punch that knocked the guy down and quickly dragged Ling away. However, Entai appeared, ordering his men to surround and attack. Just then, Officer Wu and the police force rushed in, causing Entai's henchmen to scatter and flee. Sun immediately took Ling home, telling her not to leave under any circumstances and not to pay attention to the gossip outside. If the police came, she just needed to cooperate with the investigation and not be afraid. He affirmed that supporting Elena didn't mean that he didn't care about her. Ling gently replied that she understood clearly because he was doing what was right. She didn't blame him at all. After that, Sun went to find Elena and discovered that she was burning documents. She seemed confused, not understanding why Entai had been cornered by the police. Sun explained. After Yao Ba was arrested, he revealed the relationship between Entai and Nkuen's death in the hope of getting a lighter sentence. Just then, Officer Wu appeared and invited both of them to the station to cooperate with the investigation. At the police station, Officer Wu announced that Entai had escaped. Yao Ba admitted that he and Entai had jointly killed Nkuen. The police were surrounding the area to hunt him down and had also searched Entai's house and seized some valuable exhibits. However, surprisingly, most of the serious incidents related to the Kuenjai group were not directed by the Khan brothers. Hearing that, Sun suddenly recalled the scene of Elena burning documents. He realized that she had destroyed the evidence. Officer Wu nodded, saying that they would continue to assist him in finding evidence. But now Elena would definitely act more cautiously than ever. And Sun was angry because he felt that he had been exploited. People close to him, like Nkuen, had died, Entai had fled, and he himself was stuck in the middle of this vortex. He bitterly asked for a cigarette, but Officer Wu gave him chewing gum, reminding him that living outside for many years, his mouth was used to holding cigarettes, and now returning to living a normal life. Would he be able to adapt? And Sun chewed the gum, nodding, and said that he would continue to investigate. In fact, he only wanted to live a peaceful life and didn't care about wealth or power. Finally, he returned to find Elena. She calmly admitted that she had dumped all the blame on Entai. To her, the opportunity came faster than expected, and now Elena had taken the initiative. After discussing with Elena, and Sun reiterated her previous promise to the shareholders that she would use her personal shares to save the group. However, Elena refused because she thought it was too risky, especially when Entai's whereabouts were still unknown, like a potential threat that could return at any time. And Sun determined that they had to make Entai disappear completely because he wouldn't easily give up power to live anonymously. They decided to wait for the opportunity when Entai showed his face before taking action. The next morning, Ndong, a henchman of an underworld force, came to Elena, forcing her to deliver the promised goods. When she pretended not to know anything, Ndong pulled out a knife to threaten her, believing that they had broken their trust, not keeping their word, and warning that if they continued to go back on their word, he wouldn't be polite. Just as he was about to act, and Sun appeared in time, grabbing the blade of the knife to prevent any reckless action. And Dong accused that it was Sin's group that had caused the trouble, making the partner from Chi country angry. Although his side had paid in full, the goods had still not been seen. Elena tried to blame it on Nkuen, but Ndong rejected it because Nkuen was dead, Entai had fled, so now she was the only lead that could be pursued. To defuse the situation, and Sun told Elena to go inside and make tea, then bowed to apologize to Ndong. He promised to try his best to meet all the requirements, and also committed to refunding the entire amount of money. But Ndong coldly refused, believing that everything was too late. After 2 broken promises and having it exposed to the police, even if they compensated, it wouldn't mean anything anymore. If they really wanted to make up for it, they had to pay double the amount of money. Faced with Ndong's pressure, and Sun had to accept the condition of double compensation within 2 days. Only after receiving that commitment did Ndong agree to withdraw. Meanwhile, Ling was walking on the street when she suddenly fainted due to a high fever. Coincidentally, her ex-boyfriend, Song Rong, passed by and took her to the hospital. On this side, Elena was angry because Sun had hastily agreed to compensate within 2 short time. With such a large amount of goods, it was extremely difficult to manage. But Sun believed that if they hadn't yielded at that time, they might have lost their lives. He asserted that the situation could no longer be concealed. After that, Sun went outside to call Ling, but Song Rong answered, informing him that she was in the hospital due to a high fever. Hearing that, Sun immediately hung up in silence. Waking up from the coma, Ling faced Song Rong. He asked if she still hated him. Ling calmly replied that after leaving you, I met a good person and realized why I couldn't have an ending with others before, so I don't have any complaints anymore. Song Rong mentioned the call earlier and said that he had answered it for her. Ling frantically looked for her phone, saw that it was Sin's number, and immediately called back, but he had turned off his phone. She fell into sadness, while Sun wondered why Ling had contacted Song Rong, and since when the two of them had become so close. At this time, Elena received a notification that the goods were ready, and she and Sun immediately got into the car to go to the transaction location. However, when they arrived, they didn't see Dong's group. He suddenly changed the location to the Hyatt Hotel in the city center and requested Sun to go up there alone. At the same time, Officer Wu also received information about the transaction location and began to deploy the plan to encircle and arrest. Meanwhile, Ling was still trying to find a way to open the mysterious USB. She suddenly remembered the photo she picked up at Entai's house. At the hotel, when the two were about to reach the transaction location, Elena suddenly received a strange text message. She pretended to be dizzy and told Sun to go in alone, promising to contact him after it was done. Without any suspicion, Sun agreed and entered, completely unaware of the conspiracy waiting ahead. When he saw Elena suddenly leaving the scene, his subordinate immediately reported to Officer Wu. Realizing the situation might change, he ordered to continue monitoring. Inside the hotel, as Sun just stepped in preparing to make the transaction, a henchman of Dong frantically ran in to report that the police had arrived. Dong immediately became enraged, smashing a bottle of wine straight into Sun's head, turning the transaction into a melee. Just then, Officer Wu ordered to encircle, and all of Dong's men were arrested. The one who sent the secret message to Elena, causing her to leave, was none other than Ling Yi. In the closed room, Ling Yi angrily grabbed Elena's neck, questioning why years ago Nan Yi, her best friend, was pushed down from this very place. Elena coldly replied that Nan Yi was her best friend, but because she refused to submit, she suffered a tragic end. Ling Yi presented evidence of the crime, causing Elena to be afraid, begging that as long as she handed over the evidence, she could give Ling Yi anything. But Ling Yi didn't need anything. She came to Kuinjai for many years just to make Elena face the truth, to bow her head to apologize to Nan Yi and repent. Just as Elena apologized, she suddenly stabbed a knife into Ling Yi's stomach, forcing her to hand over the evidence. But Ling Yi had already transferred it to the police. Having been tricked, Elena angrily wanted to send her down to meet her friend. Just then, Sun appeared, pointing a gun at Elena, but she quickly threatened, forcing him to drop the gun. He tremblingly released his hand, trying to persuade her to calm down, saying that he could do anything. Elena demanded that he kneel down, and Sun immediately complied. Then, taking advantage of the gap, he shot her in the arm, quickly carrying Ling Yi to the hospital. Outside the emergency room, Sun was so worried that he was suffocating, his heart felt like it was falling out of his chest. He sat beside the hospital bed, constantly crying, begging Ling Yi to wake up. To him, now as long as she lived, he would be willing to die. When Ling Yi woke up, Sun burst into joy, holding her tight in his arms. After that, Song Rong brought a bouquet of flowers to visit Ling Yi, leaving his blessings, then quietly left, closing an incomplete old love. The next morning, Sun took Ling Yi to a room shimmering with lights, a place that he had personally decorated beautifully like a dream. Here, he spoke the words of sincerity that everything they had experienced was precious. She was the light that saved him from the darkness. Then he took out a ring self-woven with leaves, wore it on her hand, and promised after she was discharged from the hospital, he would give her a real diamond ring. In response, Ling Yi gave him a passionate kiss. The two embraced each other tightly in a moment filled with happiness. The next morning, seeing Ling Yi sleeping peacefully, Sun felt relieved and left the hospital room. But as soon as he stepped out, an assassin sent by Entai immediately sneaked into the room with the intention of ending her life. However, he fell into the trap of the police who were ambushing and was immediately arrested. The assassin confessed that Entai and Dong were currently hiding in an abandoned building in the southern suburbs. The loud noise during the arrest made Ling Yi curious to listen, and she accidentally learned the information. Without thinking, she immediately ran out, hailed a taxi, and rushed to find Sun in a panic. At the same time, Sun was still tracking Entai. He followed him to an abandoned house in the outskirts, not knowing that it was all a trap that had been set up. He tied him up and brutally beat him with a stick, pushing him into a state of bloody mess. Knowing that he was a policeman, Entai screamed bitterly, saying that he had suspected Sun from the beginning, but no one believed him, including his closest teammate. Therefore, he had killed that person. Now that Sun had solved a major case, he was left with nothing in hand but hatred. He held the stick, intending to finish him off on the spot. Just then, Ling Yi arrived in time. Seeing Sun being tortured, she knelt down, begging Entai to spare his life. But all that only made him even more furious. In a fit of madness, he roared that if he spared Sun, who would spare him? Then he announced that he would let the two of them be together forever. At the very moment he was about to attack Ling, Sun unexpectedly managed to untie himself, lunged to grab the gun, and subdued Entai. At the same time, Officer Wu led the special forces to rush in. Cornered, Entai had no way out. He laughed loudly like a madman, then pulled out the remote control, pressed the button to activate the bomb, determined to drag everyone to ashes. Despite that, Ling Yi and Officer Wu luckily escaped from the danger, but she was like a lost soul. When she returned to the hospital, she received the item that Sun had left behind, a diamond ring. She burst into tears because this loss was too great, the pain that nothing could compensate for. The days that followed passed in boundless sadness. Suddenly one day, Ling discovered a gift box placed in front of the door. From that day on, she received fresh flowers every day, not knowing who the sender was. In her heart, a faint hope arose that it was sent by Sun, but she didn't dare to believe it was true. She sat quietly looking at the bouquets with thousands of unanswered questions. 3 years passed. Ling lived quietly with a small cat as a companion. Suddenly one day, the news reported on the dismantling of the largest drug trafficking network in the past 20 years, lasting 3 years, with the participation of 300 police officers. Hearing this, she unconsciously looked down at the ring Sun had left behind. The pain and memories flooded back again. But when she turned her head, she was frozen to see Sun in police uniform standing in front of her. It turned out that he didn't die in the explosion. Although he was seriously injured, he was always worried about her. For 3 years, because of the secret mission, he had to hide, unable to meet Ling Yi. It was he who secretly watched her from afar, giving her flowers every day, silently present in her life like a nameless shadow. Now that the mission was over, Sun finally returned to Ling Yi. She was so touched that she couldn't believe the truth before her eyes. They hugged each other in tears and overwhelming happiness, continuing the love story full of tears and hope. A fulfilling ending closed the film here. Thank you all for accompanying the channel to the last minutes of the movie. Please love the channel even more. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so that we have more motivation to release better and faster videos. Thank you all.